And we're live. Over to his Jeffness.
All right. Well, this is Homicide: Life on the Street, Season 7, Episode 16, entitled Truth Will Out. Written by Anya Epstein and Noel Bain and directed by Keith Samples. Originally aired March 26, 1999. And I'm going to read a brief recap here from TV.com. A woman comes looking for Falzone, knowing that he recently solved a really old case and wants him to look into a case for her from 1972. Her parents told her that she was responsible for her younger brother's death. Despite being 3 years old at the time, the woman has doubts about her parents' story. So Falzone and Stivers reopen this case, which was closed by G when he was a new detective. The reopening of the case makes G think that he may not have been totally focused on the case at the time. Their investigation reveals the woman's mother used her daughter as a scapegoat for the mother's crime. Bayless and Ballard's case involves a body that was shot, but the victim was already dead from a drug overdose. The male sergeant at the scene piques Bayless's interest, so they get together for drinks. The relationship doesn't develop, however, because word is spreading about Bayless being the owner of the In Plain Sight website. Bayless begins feeling pressure about his being different and considers celibacy. Ballard may consider the same option when her relationship with Falzone becomes difficult to maintain as a secret. So there's the gist of that. Ben, what did you think?
I think I remember to switch the mic on. I think that about 5 out of 10 is one of these depressing storylines about like dead children and babies and stuff. I didn't really enjoy it at all. Although I am feeling a bit under the weather at the moment.
Yeah, I actually was a little bit concerned about that because I was like, considering some of the past stories that have been kind of bleak and depressing, and you've been like, I wasn't in a real good frame of mind. I was like, hopefully he can watch this with a little bit more, with feeling better. But anyway.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's just tough to get through. I mean, it helps that there's been like previous episodes like this, but I don't know, there's not much to say. I mean, we didn't get that much Munch.
I've got plenty I can say, but I was waiting for you.
I've not got much. Come on,
I have plenty to say too. So.
Well, excellent.
Okay,
you two can cover for me then.
Well, that's good. I'll let Bradley have his say first, since it was new to him. So.
All right. Well, there was some. I mean, there are some good things I thought about the episode, and there are some not so good things. I guess I'll start with the good things. Really strong acting. I didn't get. I thought the mother and the daughter played the characters really well. There wasn't a point where I was sort of normally what's been happening like the past couple is I've sort of noticed the illusion's sort of been broken to where you can tell that the acting doesn't quite fit the character, and I didn't get any of that from this episode, so that was very good. I thought granted it's very hard to act. It's really hard to act when the story is so traumatic. When the story is so traumatic, it's very hard to act in a way that's realistic because you can't really come from a real place. So, of course, there was a lot of guesswork about how people would act in a certain situation. But I think the mother played she played innocent really well. And I think the daughter played guilty very well. And it wasn't. I mean, it started becoming obvious when they had, at some point in the story, you sort of know, okay, it's coming to the end of show, and you do the sort of meta thinking to where you think, you know, it can't possibly be anyone else besides the two of them. So once it became obvious it wasn't the daughter, you kind of just knew, you know, the mom was hiding something. What was she hiding? And it turns out that she hid the actual crime. So I suppose they did throw the father in there as sort of a big, you know, he wasn't there to defend himself, so they could have just said, you know, he did it. And I thought it was all done really well. They treated basically three suspects. You basically knew there were only three suspects throughout the whole story, and I thought they managed it really well to keep you still interested in the development of it. And yeah, the whole song and dance of trying to, you know, find out who done it was very satisfactory to me. The ending of the story I have an issue with, but I'll bring this up later. The whole Bayless thing sort of felt out of place. I thought it was very real, you know, how people find out something about you and then suddenly treat you differently. I thought that was the very realness of it, but I think the context of how it came up. I mean, it's definitely realistic in that one day everything's fine, and another day you're brought into the office and basically told, okay, I know you have a right to your opinions, but your opinions are getting out, and they could have ramifications. So that part was the part I was okay with. It's just the balancing. I guess the reason they the whole reason, the whole story reason of the body that was shot after the man was dead was to introduce the police officer who was going to go out with, and it was a major point that his website came out, and then he was stood up, and then he went to his precinct to address him directly, and called him. I won't say the word he got called, but it was a derogatory term for a gay person. 6 letters, begins with an F, ends with a T, and he yelled it. He called Bayless that very loudly in front of everyone, and of course it caught everyone's attention. And the officer just wanted to shift the attention off of himself and put it directly onto Bayless, which was more or less the only reason he was in the episode, was to basically do that and to further push the Bayless's story. I guess the scene at the bar when they were sitting to take the restaurant that he got stood up at, that was sort of a it was about bisexuality and how Bayless identified as a bisexual, and the gay guy was like, I'm not sure if I believe in that. And that could be, I guess he just sort of wanted to throw light on the whole situation and the whole gray areas and how people can have multiple perspectives. So, like, for instance, in terms of like LGBTQ people, the gay person was skeptical that bisexuality was a thing. So maybe they're just trying to showcase the nuances, and they wanted to portray a complete picture of, not everyone in that community is sort of supporting everyone in the same way, and they all agree that it should be treated equally, but in terms of the actual viewpoints of the orientations, it could probably vary from person to person. And just because someone's a part of that community doesn't mean that they fully believe everything that all the members of the community believe about themselves. In terms of how it sort of fit, it didn't. The story itself, Bayless's story in itself was okay, and it related it very beautifully. The whole truthful out sort of thing, it was about the mother, that mother right there, her lies, and it's about Bayless's sort of half truths, and then Falzon and Bella's secret relationship. So it didn't very much fit the frame of the whole, lying and omitting of facts. So that fit. But in terms of the ebb and flow of, they have they have a body that they find, and they they go to the medical examiner who's like, yeah, he was already dead. And actually, I'm sorry, I might be confusing that. I remember they went to him once about the baby getting a second opinion from the original examiner, who just sort of assumed that it was the child who killed the other child. But I also, correct me if I'm wrong, they also part of Bayless's investigation also led to the ME, which was it was just I forgot how he died, but he was already dead before he was shot, and that was
They
that
said it
sort
was
of
a heroin overdose.
right, exactly. So it was basically drugs, and it was, I don't know. To me, it seems like a bit of a throwaway case, as in it was too obvious. The case didn't um, the case didn't progress in a way that made you think it was anything other than a way to get the black gay officer into Bayless's life. So that part is sort of I have an issue with. They generally treat the cases very well, and it's generally not like a convenient prop to showcase another story event. So that kind of that bugged me a little. And then also the way they just sort of casually got all the characters who weren't being used. They got Munch, they got Gotti, they got Shepard
Lewis.
and Lewis. Yeah, they got them together for a very brief scene about talking about Bayless, and it always bugs me when they basically get characters in a room just to have them there, just so they can be a part of a story and have absolutely no other significance. Because none of the four of them were in it at all, other than to discuss Bayless very briefly, and he never saw half of them again. What were you going to say?
I partially agree with you, but I do think that it kind of adds a touch of realism when you have characters that they are just kind of tangentially related to, they don't necessarily have to be a big part of the plot to be there, as opposed to a lot of times in TV, if a character is not involved in a particular story, you just don't see them at all that week, so they don't have to pay the actor. So,
Right.
I like the fact that you kind of are reminded that there's a lot of other people going around, and it's not necessarily just people heavily involved in that particular week's episode. So
Yeah, right. Well, I agree with you there, but
if it
it
seems
seemed
forced,
very
where it's
yeah,
like, oh, we
exactly.
have to include each member of the cast to say a line, then that's different. But I didn't think it didn't feel that way to me, but maybe it did to you. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it did to me expressly because they involved the uninvolved characters one time, and it was only the uninvolved characters that came together. So it made me feel like it was like very artificially injected. Like I think you can have the characters tangentially related, if that's the correct word or the correct way to say it. But you can insert the characters in a like organic way to where they just sort of are passing by each other. But this
Well,
sort of instance,
if you were writing the story and trying to accomplish that same thing, where you're like the chatter about Bayless is going on, would you just use less characters in the scene, or how would you think it would be better?
oh, like maybe in the actual squad room and not the break room, because it seemed like the break room is rarely used for anything other than to. I mean, the break room is basically used to further a plot. It's basically like a plot device, and the case the actual squad room is sort of like the natural flow where things are just sort of going on and everyone's sort of come together and leaving it and doing their own separate thing. So to me, that the very like they could have just had people talking about it like at the as they were going to get coffee or something, or whether at their desk and sort of talking to each other across the squad room. That to me would have seemed more natural than like all the four of them and only those four. It wasn't like anyone else who was more directly involved. Like even Stivers wasn't there, even though she was basically there to well, she was one of the detectives on the main case, but also she is the one who found out that Bad was still seeing Falzone and knew about it. So I guess those are her two purposes, but even she wasn't in there. Is what I'm trying to say. So it did make it seem very artificially constructed in that way, in that the break room was being used in a very inorganic way, I feel. And it's not as big as a deal as I'm making it, but I did definitely notice it. And then what really sort of bugged me the most was sort of the conclusion of the main case, to where G finally confronts the mother, because he sort of like he had a gut instinct. That the whole thing about him, pressuring little G about when whatever was going on with her sister, and, he was sort of like he was eyeing the case from afar, like he was eyeing the daughter and he was eyeing the mother, and he must have been having like gut instincts and like intuitive insights that he wasn't sharing with anyone. And, he was sort of he made a phone call to, I forgot who he made the call to, but he was doing like a whole bunch of stuff where you weren't sure what was happening, but because in the end he was just he was going through his own thing about maybe she did it, except we weren't really seeing it. We just we knew something was going on, but we sort of left to speculate exactly what was going on. So I was expecting when he was bringing up the sister, the little G sister, his daughter, I thought it was going to be like something bigger, but it just turns out that, quote, something was going on with her, and that impeded his ability to focus on the investigation. And I thought that was a very maybe it felt like I was being led, or maybe I was reading myself by trying to picture what was going on in his mind. And it just turns out that he had doubts that weren't being made public to the audience, and it didn't really come out until he basically in the final scene with the mother, he's basically like just says, yeah, it wasn't you, it wasn't her, it was you. And he just sort of said, I know it was you. It didn't really offer any proof. There was the thing about the previous injuries in the baby that died, that obviously something happened to him previously that couldn't have been the daughter, so it was either the mother or the father. But in terms of like finding out the actual truth that the mother did it, that was very unsatisfactory. And then when they're building up this sort of first the mother was innocent, and then the mother started to look guilty, and she started to look even guiltier when the G and the daughter were pressing her together, and then the ultimate the ultimate like building point was just not even a confession from her, just sort of like the yes, I did it look that she gives G at the end, and then that's the end of that. And that sort of, I thought that was very anticlimactic, and not in the way like how you're expecting things to be resolved differently, and they were resolved like naturally, organically. I just thought I think it was too much to be doing the whole G brooding in the background and not having anything offered at the end besides the realization that he misjudged her and didn't specify why or how. So that's what bugged me the most about the episode, but everything else was fine, I thought. Right, I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah. I said a couple weeks ago that homicide.com was probably my least favorite episode of the entire series, and this would probably be my second least favorite. As Ben said, it is depressing and bleak, and the thing, and what occurred to me right at the end of what you were saying there is that the type of episode this is, every element of this episode we've seen them do better before on Homicide. So it was like it seemed like it was the discount convenience store version of the same. We've had bleak and depressing episodes before, but we're also powerful in some way. And this one really never has that. It just sort of, there's a recurring theme on Homicide where, things don't turn out how you want them, and life can be depressing, and, you don't have the satisfying ending to things. And so we've gotten that already, but a lot of times there's sort of there's character moments within that where you're like, either somebody learned something from this, or somebody, you know, in some way you saw a new side to a character, or there was something, certain elements that were new to it. And it seemed like with this that there really wasn't any of that. It was just sort of rehashing things they've done better before. We've had better old cases being brought back up before, and you know, it's like all of these elements that it was the mediocre version of. And I agree with you about the ending to the case about the child. That you know, I found myself thinking, this woman who's held this secret for all these years and lied to everybody about what happened. She, you know, I know G can put some pretty intimidating stares on people, but the idea that suddenly, like, she broke down, and that they don't show her break down, but you're just sort of assuming that at some point she did after that because they put her name up in blue. And then he says, you know, there's little details that are still good in terms of him saying that it's up to the state's attorney whether they actually prosecute her. And I'm thinking it's probably very little chance that they would be able to get a conviction, you know. So unless she's actually going to plead guilty to something, you know, the case probably isn't going to go anywhere, which, you know, is a whole part of that kind of bleak look to the episode, because it's saying, you know, even though we probably are pretty sure what happened now, you're still probably not going to actually get justice done. And meanwhile, the daughter has lived all her life up to this point with this on her. It's not really a closure for her either. Even if she believes to, you know, even if her mother told her the truth, this is still something that's haunted her for so long that, you know, it may not really make it better. You know, it doesn't bring her brother back. It doesn't bring back those years of all that time her thinking that she was the one who did it. So there's this really melancholy that we're left with. And, you know, the cheeriest part of the episode is probably, you know, the G's looking at baby pictures. And so you have, you know, a few elements, but, you know, so much of it was just, you know, Bayless's whole story. It's like, again, it's just the theme of people suck, you know, and you're not going to have, you know, whatever it is you're trying to do, you know, you're not going to uh, be able to please everybody. You're going to have, somebody's going to be bothered by something, you know. And you have, as Bradley's pointed out, a lot of the characters on the show are guardian type, SJ types. They fear change or difference, you know, and anything that's outside of their comfort zone, going to be skeptical of. And then you have even the SP characters that they're bugged by things because it's you know, it's not, they lose control of certain situations, or they don't have, you know, it gets in the way of things they're trying to do. So you have Lewis kind of expressing, you know, this is bothersome to me just because it's disrupting, you know, my ability to do my job or whatever, you know, his opinion. And, you know, you have obviously two people who, in Bayless and the sergeant, who want different things. And so they quickly kind of clash in a way in terms of their perspectives on things. But you also have Bayless, who even says, you know, I'm not trying to be a crusader. So he shows, you know, once again, he's not really an NF. You know, even if he wants to dabble in Buddhism and these things, you know, he has this, oh, I want to be a philosopher. But when he's confronted with the reality of, you know, is he going to stick to his guns about certain things? He's not really committed to that. He's not really that kind of person. His explorations are personal. They're not really him trying to, you know, crusade for any particular type of change, you know, even within the police department, much less on a larger scale. So, again, it's sort of, I did like certain elements of the direction and the way that they, the couple of the close-ups they did on Bayless, the way they sort of left, you know, Kyle Siegler, as we've said before, is a great actor and really good at certain facial expressions, expressing a lot. So the combination of his expression and the director's choices of the shots, I thought some of those elements were pretty good, in expressing just how disillusioned the Bayless was feeling after those experiences. And the Falzone story, you know, is just another. I was kind of glad that I wasn't watching it with Morgan, because it would have just been another opportunity for him to say how much he can't stand Stivers. She's always getting in people's business and causing problems.
That seems to be what she does.
Yeah,
more than
being
anyone
the
else.
busybody character. So it's like, in this, I would have kind of agreed with him, because I'm like, I'm really thinking, what, unless that's really causing a problem for you, why are you even thinking about like tattling on them? It's like, it's a little different. You know, we had the whole storyline with Luther Mahoney. It's a little bit different when it comes to witnessing somebody shoot somebody versus witnessing two cops on a date. You know, it's really not that big a deal, even if there's a department policy about it. But for her to kind of throw in this thing about it, you know, I'm not going to lie for you if G asked me, you know, it's like, what is her deal, you know? And so the whole thing is just kind of comes off a little bit just cartoonish or like junior high-ish. It's just, it's kind of, you know, what's the point of this? I will say, in the scene that they were in the kitchen or whatever, that Ballard did look pretty hot in that outfit. I have to say that, you know, even though they didn't show a lot of it, but still, you got a little more skin than you usually see on on Homicide. A little bit more of an NYPD Blue deal.
I can see the thing with Stivers where she is a sort of cover your own ass kind of person.
Yeah.
I can tell that Ben was not feeling good, as he didn't even get a picture of Ballard, so obviously was not focused. Oh, the other thing, just little bits occurred to me, and like, you know, that were a little bit cheesier. Like, you know, Bayless goes to a club called the Gay 90s, and then just the cop from that day just happens to be right there at the bar for him to see. It's like, oh, that's a little, you know, not like coincidences don't happen, but still, it's like, oh, plot convenience, you know?
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, you said the thing about, you know, all of the other cops who hadn't been involved sort of getting together at the same time. You know, that I didn't really have a problem with. To me, that seems a little more realistic than it just Bayless happens to run into the same guy at the bar that he decides to go to that night. You know, I mean, one thing if there was like, you know, because they sort of implied there was a little bit of body language between him at the scene. If maybe the guy had like, you know, slipped Bayless a piece of paper with the name of the place or something, like he'd invited him there or something, you know, then I could see, well, that makes sense more. But he just happens to stroll in and he sees him there, and then they have, you know, it just seemed a little contrived. So it just seemed, like I said, that there was a lot of just the examples of things Homicide's done better before, and the things that were better, like you said, the acting, I can't ever fault that. You know, very rarely can I fault the acting on Homicide. Everybody performed their parts, you know, well. Everything was, you know, it flowed in terms of the pacing of the episode. There wasn't any kind of issues with that. It's just there really wasn't anything that powerful in it, compelling enough that really made the episode stand out as, oh, this is really good television. It was just more like, you know, you're left with kind of a feeling of, man, people suck. You know, was kind of the theme, and there, and, you know, don't have any closure to these things. And you know, like I said, some of that is typical on Homicide, but there's usually like a little bit more meat to it that you can use, you know, and something to get out of it. And this, there really just wasn't that much. So I still think overall it's better than Homicide.com was, because that just had some flat out unrealistic things. The script was just kind of awful. And this one, you know, it's better than that because there's nothing that I found that ridiculous about it. It just wasn't that good. You know, it just didn't really have punch to it. It didn't have stuff that made me be, oh yeah, I want to see that again. This would definitely not be an episode I would show to somebody who had never seen Homicide before as a good example of Homicide, for sure. But, you know, even the recurring stories that were mentioned, you know, it doesn't do a lot of advancing it. You know, it just sort of treads water in a certain place. I guess it's sort of the only bit we have is Bayless shutting down his website. So at least you have that element of, you know, that specific thing won't exist anymore, at least at the time, for the time being. So, but other than that, it was like, it kind of seemed like a little bit of filler till something happens. And when it comes to the recurring stories.
Yeah, I will say, for the whole Stivers thing is, yeah, that's really, so I guess he was deciding, you know, how how she already knew that she wasn't going to just go straight up to G and be like, hey, this is still going on. But I think she's trying to figure out exactly how far she's willing to go to cover them. I think that was the sort of confusion she was having.
Yeah,
Just,
and I think if she had said it that way, I would have had less of a problem. But it just seems like she seems to phrase things in the most annoying way possible.
yeah,
You know,
true.
it's like if she had just said, "Hey, if it had just been all she said, like if G asked me, I'm not going to lie about it or whatever, then I would have thought, okay, whatever. She's just saying, hey, do your thing. But instead, she kind of does this kind of self-righteous thing, like she's judging Falzone for the way he's doing whatever, and it's like, who are you to to be, where do you get off like trying to analyze this? It's like, if it's actually causing you some sort of problem, then that's one thing. But there's not really any reason why she would have to feel guilty about it or anything. So I don't, that kind of just. But I don't necessarily. I think that's a flaw in the show. It's just that particular character. They chose to after introducing her as kind of a strong-willed but sort of more reasonable person. They kind of at some point decided she was going to be more annoying. And I don't know exactly why, but I guess they figured that was going to be the personality trait they were going to stress with her.
I guess. Yeah, I mean, sorry, go. You can
She is a
finish.
good detective, but just her personality is not very likable. It seems like.
Yeah, I will say, granted, I'm not I came in late, so I'm not sure. I haven't seen her since the character was introduced, but yeah, she definitely seems to be the person where it's like we need someone to be involved for no particular reason whatsoever. Who's it going to be here? I know. Let's get Stivers to do it. I do think the character does get stuck with a lot of that. I know it's none of my business, but I saw you and I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
she just gets stuck with a lot of that. I will say, like, I think compared to like her issue with Shepard and her being the one to confront her about that, I think compared to the previous confrontation, this one where she said that Falzone and her are talking about Bayless being outed as his religious views being outed, and she directly linked it to say there's nothing wrong with the relationship, but the truth will come out eventually. I think was that sort of, they had several conversations, and one of them, a lot of them was that Falzone just being, "You're not going to tell you," and she was just like, "I don't know yet." There's a lot of that, but also that one instance, she was just trying to intimate to him that people are going to find out one way or another, so be careful, sort of thing. Well, she's being a friend first and a Stivers later. But I do definitely agree with she is used a lot for that role of being the someone should the are you sure kind of person, which I can see how that can get annoying if it's done over to if she's not doing anything else but that, then yeah.
So do you both expect Stivers to lie to G then?
I don't expect her to, no, but
Right.
what I said about it was just it was kind of an unnecessary thing. The way she kind of, it just came off as sort of self-righteous the way she said it too, like like I'm the good detective, I'm not going to lie to the boss kind of thing. And it wasn't really necessary, I think, for her to say, or she could have said it in a way that was basically like, just I'm not going to put my own self in jeopardy for what, covering for you or something. But rather than it being like a judgment on, well, this is what you should do, it was just more of like about protecting herself. And so honestly, to me, her being more self-centered about it would have seemed less annoying to me. That's just kind of my personal opinion, but that's, not surprising coming from me because it's my general view when it comes to people who act like they want to control other people's lives. I have that viewpoint of those people. So, and she comes off that way in this episode for sure.
She's also definitely one of the Ben said it earlier, the CYA. Cover your ass. One of those people who are like always, trying to look after
and
themselves.
that's what I say. If it was just about that, then I would have more respect for it. But it's like it's like this judgment on top of that, where she's kind of getting in his business on top of it, instead of just being like, hey, if I get asked, I'm going to tell the truth. It wasn't framed in a way like, oh, I'm just protecting myself. It was more like I'm telling you what to do. It's more about being up in your business than anything. I'm just sort of going to cover that by pretending it's about covering myself, because that's what it came across to me.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Granted, I haven't had as much. I haven't been around Stivers long enough to see exactly what she's good for. But I did get but from the very first episode, I was like, so I didn't know why she was even part of the team. Like she hasn't had any stories of her own since I've been watching. So
yeah, they not a lot. They've shown her doing some detective work, but so it's obvious that she's seen as a competent detective. But she has other personality traits that get on people's nerves. But that part has been true from the very beginning of Homicide. You had characters like Felton and Cressetti that both were portrayed as bothering a lot of people, but still getting their work done. Having their own sort of methods that might have been quirky or bothersome to some people, but were able to produce results. So, Falzone and Stivers are both kind of portrayed somewhat like that. I just happen to think they're not quite as interesting as the original characters were, and a lot of people back when the show first aired agreed with me. But I don't fault the actors, because I think they're doing a good job of playing what they've been given. I just think the quality of the writing of the characters, I think, maybe went down a bit from the start.
okay.
But it's not easy to maintain compelling characters over many years. So, in some ways, the early days of Homicide are somewhat idealized by fans, partially because there were less episodes. I mean, the first 2 seasons comprised only 13 episodes, so it's sort of easy to look at it as, oh, those were the good old days, and realize, well, they had a lot more episodes that came, when they had full seasons that came later, so they had a lot more material they had to churn out. And it's not easy to maintain the same level when it comes to that.
I think a lot of the earlier characters were based on real people, weren't they, Jeff?
Yeah. And when David Simon joined the show, I think he tried to inject, more of the stuff that came out of his book and the real things, even if the characters themselves weren't always based on him. He's tried to work in elements of that. But yeah, so I mean, some of the characters like Shepard and stuff are just were pure Hollywood, if you want to call that. And even though it was filmed in Baltimore, it was network making concessions of, you'll stay on the air, but you need to add people that are better looking. We don't want to have Howard, a realistic female cop. We want better looking female cops, so we'll get better ratings and things like that. So they were obviously interfered with some, but they can't be the only blame for that situation. But anyway, I think to me it's a testament how much I love Homicide overall. The show, that I think the quality of the show is so good that I can pick at the ones in the late years more, just because they don't measure up to previous episodes of Homicide. I'd still put something like this above so many shows that I've come across, because even if this episode was more formulaic, the formula is still better than a lot of other shows I've seen. So it's like, I can be like, this is an example of mediocre Homicide, but still higher quality television than plenty of other things that I've seen. So, anyway.
So we can go through those characters that have come and gone, about which ones have been. So Frank was based on a real person. What about Felton? Was he based on a real person?
Yeah, all of the original cast were based at least partially on the real cops. Some of them were either combined, like with, you had elements, because you had more cops portrayed in the book, and they kind of combined elements from more than one cop into one for the show, which is a pretty common thing, when you have books adapted to either television or movies, that you have characters sort of combined into one with different elements. So you definitely had that happen with Homicide. Is that there were two. There was one Italian guy and one Irish guy that were combined into Corsetti.
Right.
So there was the Irish guy was actually the one that was like the conspiracy theorist dude, and then the Italian one was the one that was, had like the wound from getting shot that he talked about. So there was like, certain things like that where people were sort of combined into one. And the primary detective on certain cases wasn't necessarily the same, because they, for whatever reason, they thought it'd be more drama to have a certain character involved. Like, for instance, the scene that I first show you from Homicide, where with Pimbleton in the box, where he's getting the guy to confess that didn't really do it. That the cop that was actually on that case about the shooting that ended up being a cop was actually the real life person that Bolander was based on, rather than Pimbleton. So it's, there was some creative license taken in those situations as well. Like the guy that Bayless was based on, the one who caught the case that was similar to the Adina Watson case, was not the same one that did some of the other stuff that they based those original things on, like some of the other like the situation with Bayless going to like the leather club and stuff like that. That was a different guy. So things like that, where they combined some of the stories that were different cops into one cop. So that was the main difference.
Right.
In the characters.
So my score again is 5 out of 10.
Bradley, what say you on a score?
6.5, 6.5 out of 10. I think the acting was good enough. And
Go ahead.
And I was going to say, well, the acting was good enough, and the story, the intent behind the story was good enough, even if the execution wasn't the best. So yeah, 6 out of 5. 6.5 out of 10.
And I'll go with Ben and give it a 5, even though I have to say that it's only the second episode I've given a 5 to, and the other one was homicide.com, which I still think is worse than this one. So this was a slightly better 5 than the other one, but not much better. But yeah, I didn't have a problem with any of the acting or anything. It's just, it's just not a real good, compelling story. It's still not boring, which is what keeps it from getting a 4. Because I've told Ben before, on my scale, it's like, once something is just has parts where I'm starting to get bored, then it slips below 5 into the 4 territory. But so I wasn't bored. It just didn't impress me in any way. So, all right. So join us next week for thankfully a better episode entitled Zen and the Art of Murder.
All right. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
All right.